cello, like explorer and creator. Then we have also working groups where we bring people together to discuss how can we move the industry forward. We all believe that open source is the way to go forward, because if we develop tools that, or frameworks that are closed source and with in-house within a single company, then the code is dependent on that single entity. And if the entity is not really interested anymore in sustaining the code, then, well, the code dies. And people who are using it are no longer able to update it, use it, and the whole project dies. But if we depend on an open source community, in any domain really, well, the code can be sustained by the open source community and is no longer dependent on a single person or a single entity.
Thank you, Marta. So Marta just started talking about the actual benefits of using open source. You know, looking more broadly about the history of open source in the IT industry, which, you know, again, I'm happy to be a big part of. I claim to be a pioneer of open source because I released the first piece of code in open source in 1990. It's called libxpm. It was a small library to display color icons on the Unix desktops. And it's still in use today, I'm happy to say.
Of course.
And so at the time, and I installed Emacs some time ago on my machine, and I was happy to see that it was actually using my library to display color icons. I have to admit that is pretty cool. And I haven't touched that code in many years, and just like Marta said, the thing is the community picked it up and they kept updating it, and I know there were security issues related to it at some point, and it was addressed and fixed. But so back to, you know, the role of open source in the IT industry, I think everybody knows that, you know, the beginnings were a bit difficult, and Microsoft is well known to have called this some kind of communist initiative. And obviously, everybody has come around by now. It's broadly used across the industry. IBM was a pioneer in adopting open source. You know, we are lucky that we had a CEO who realized that fundamentally it was very similar to what we had been doing in science, in research for a long time, where researchers share innovations, right? They find stuff and they actually have these meetings, they have conferences all the time, and they share the discoveries because that triggers more thoughts, and by doing this collaboratively, they all gain from it. And open source is very similar to this, right? Even IBM being a big company as it is, we don't have, you know, such a broad audience as we can have when we go open source, where you have a community which is, you know, potentially reaching out throughout the globe. And you have people with different backgrounds, different skills that can participate. And they bring their own use cases and requirements, and they try to address them and help the whole system make it better for everybody. So that's the, you know, essence of open source. And as I said, you know, I think it's now widely accepted as a good way to do things. There is another aspect, though, that is still kind of, you know, not so well understood, is the open governance aspect. So there are many different projects that are open source today that, in my books, are not really open source. And the reason is there's a single entity behind it that controls the code. And you see a lot of that on GitHub. There are big companies that are known to be friends of open source. Really, they do the open source the bad way, in my opinion, because all they do is they put their source code out there on some repository, GitHub or otherwise, and everybody can see what's in the code, and they can take it and change it for their own good if they want to, do whatever they want with it. But beyond that, you have no real control over the evolution of the software unless you're part of that company that's behind the code. And so all you can do really is send pull requests. This is the way you submit changes to the code. And the people in charge of the project behind it, who are employee of the company who owns the project, basically decide to either they feel like this is worth it, they use it, or they ignore you, and you have no recourse, and you have no say in the control, in the evolution of the software. I mean, one of the key elements of Hyperledger, which we all share, is this aspect of open governance. So the projects have to, agree to work under certain rules that we all share, which guarantee that not a single entity will actually be in control of the code. And so talking about Fabric, for instance, I'm happy to say that we've seen that happen. It was contributed by IBM initially, so naturally, most of the developers initially were from IBM. We had 40 or so developers from IBM who all of a sudden were part of the group. But that alone didn't really make it open source, right? And now we have something like 150 contributors from 27 different organizations involved. And so for me, this is really a key factor of a successful open source story, where you actually create an open source community behind it, right? So with that being said, I would like to bring up, we have a poll. I don't know if we can get that on the screen and so we wanted to ask the audience, in your mind, does open source play a role in your selection of blockchain technology? And we'll ask again the question at the end so we can see if the discussion kind of influences you at all. So if you can use your devices to answer the questions. And by the way, I have a set of questions that we'll be asking the panel, but if you have any questions you'd like to submit through the system, please feel free to do so, and we'll try to introduce them as we go. Okay, so specifically, we heard from Marta what she thinks are the advantages of using open source for blockchain technology. I mean, do you guys have something to add on that part?
So I'll go first. And so we're a very small company. So we were founded last year. So we're a brand new startup, and we were only at 3 people a year ago. We're a bit larger now. But for a company small like us, maybe we have some good ideas. Maybe we want to build something and do something. But it's really hard to get traction if you're just a really small player. We're not even close to IBM or Intel. So open source and building a community is a way to kind of leverage the ideas and also the work of many different people in order to build something that collectively is much larger than one entity can build up by themselves. And being part of Hyperledger as a project, because the open governance model where all the meetings, anyone can join, the wiki is open to anyone. This type of model is a great way to build a community, and we found that we've been able to get much better traction with our ideas, namely Hyperledger Iroha, than what we could have done by ourselves as our company. And we've gotten other ideas from other contributors outside our company as well, and that has made, I think, a much better project than we could have built on our own. So I think that's one of the large advantages from a creator standpoint, from a person trying to put out ideas and doing something similar to dialectics from that side. From the user side, it works kind of the other way. We're a small company, so it's very hard to trust someone like us because we've only been in business for about 1.5 years. Who knows if we'll be around 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Who knows if IBM will be around in 10 to 30 years. So having open source is a way to kind of increase trust, because even if, in the worst case, if this entity were to go away, the project is still there, the community is still there, like Arnaud was saying. Even years later, someone can take these ideas and bring them to life in a new way. And so that's been a huge benefit to our company and also to people who want to use our products, because it increases the level of, security that people have. It's, I'm not going to say it's like insurance or something like that, but it is a way to kind of, have more control. If you buy a product from another company, you're up to you have to trust their design decisions and everything. But if it's open source and you join the community and you collaborate with people like Hasera is doing, then that's one way to kind of build a sustainable community that you can get new ideas, and it kind of works in a cycle. So in Japan, we use, or one of the professors we work with at the University of Aizu, Professor Fuji, he uses the analogy of miso soup. I don't know if people are familiar with it. So in miso soup, you have this, it's warm, so it heats up and it comes up to the top, and then it cools off and goes back down. So if you look at it, it's kind of like cloudy in a way. You can see these particles moving around. So that's kind of like how this cycle works. You kind of lift up ideas, and you get maybe some new ideas, maybe parts of it fall out, and then you get new ideas that are born again from that. And so that's kind of one of, I think, just my personal opinion, but it's one of the advantages of open source, I think.
And Jonathan?
Okay. Well, I'll try to put my banker's hat for a second on. So if you're a financial institution and you need to go and to promote something to your boss, and basically you need to come up with a set of features, or what is usually people are looking at the ROI, right? What's my return on investment, or kind of what are the risks associated with a project? If some other vendor comes to you and gives you some, I don't know, if you have like 5 features and it gives you 6, but you don't know what's going on in the code, you don't know how many people are using it and how, it's very difficult for you to make a case versus something that is open source. Now, I'm not saying that open source is necessarily safer or better, because I'm telling you, even as a release manager, it's very difficult to make progress when you have conflicting interests, right? So the upside of you working with something that is open source is that you don't have this risk of having the vendor lock-in. We'll talk about a little bit more probably about standardizations, but basically just the fact that people can take the code and port it to another system. So I'll give you a practical example. We are working, and we started working with Ubuntu. Okay, it's a version of Linux, and that's the standard. And then somebody from Red Hat said, hey guys, we would like you to certify it with Red Hat. Is it possible for us to, what do I need to do? And then I started talking to them. They're going to get like 2 engineers working full time, making sure that the build works all the time. Now you're going to have a Red Hat port of our code base. So just the ability for you to take some stuff, improve it, contribute it back, and then have the infrastructure open, I think it's very, very useful. So the first thing is standardization and being open, knowing what's happening. The second thing is the vendor lock-in that everybody's afraid of. Like, especially, sorry, but if you look at IBM, they had a bad reputation before of kind of locking you in, doing a lot of stuff that was proprietary. You don't understand how much is going on behind the scene. Now they say, look, guys, I'm not paying. This is all available. There's no different code base that runs on our server. We run exactly the same code. If you want to take it and port it and use it, we're using the same code. I'm deploying Fabric on Google Cloud. Okay, so I don't know. If I have somebody that wants to do it on Bloom, it's no problem, but I can take it and build it on something else. There's no problem. The code is out there. So there's a lot of benefits in you having the baseline that is available. Think about the Linux kernel. Think about all the open source kind of projects that you have. But now what we add to this project is well, you call it in different ways. I'm saying that we are just open. We're accepting contributions. We're accepting people to come in and even affect the requirements. And now that I'm releasing a release candidate, if anybody has a security feature that we promise and is not there, or something is wrong, I'm not releasing it, right? And it's nice to have somebody that is kind of not really commercially affected by the pressure that any of the 27 companies there. We just look at it and say, look, if I sign off the release, I need to make sure that it really does what it says on the box. And because it's open, I cannot even lie about it, because you say, hey, hold on, that was the mandate that we gave you.
You would never lie, right?
Yeah. No, because it's all there, right? So, no, okay, yeah, I shouldn't lie anyway. That's true. Yeah, sorry. I got correction. But I'm just saying that if we have a process and we agree on the terms and conditions and the governance model, and it's all in the open, and this is how we vote something in, this is how we vote something out. Because the problem that I have now is people coming with too many requirements. And I said, if you want a 1.0 out, we need to cut down and have a release and ship it. And then we have a 1.2, 1.5. We need to move on. But all these decisions are in the open. So it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, right? Because it just takes more time. But I think in the long run, it's a lot more powerful.
I think that, just to add one more thing, well, there are 2 more things. One is diversity. In open source, you get diversity of backgrounds, experiences, cultures. That's something that we are very proud in Hyperledger of. 25% of our members come from Asia. 25% are from Europe. So we have a very diverse group of members and people who contribute to our projects, which means that from that diversity comes an excellence that would not be possible if we developed in just a very homogeneous environment. And that's what open source gives you. It brings people together that crash heads and really fight for what is important for them and what they believe is the single most two single most important things. And that's not, as I'm saying, that's not possible in closed environments. And the second thing when it comes to open source is that especially when it comes to blockchain, because really that's what we can advocate for open source in anything, but when it comes to blockchain, is that it is important to understand that blockchain, we don't really yet know how blockchain will come out. We don't really fully understand the technology. It's a very young technology. And as with any young technology that we don't know of consequences, having it open source and having many people look at it and being developed in a kind of manner where many people look at it means that we are much more likely to catch any mistakes and have someone spot that there is something going wrong. So the more eyes we have on something and the more contributors we have, the better, really.
All right, thank you. We need to be mindful of the time.
Yeah.
We told the conference people we would have no problem talking about this for a long time. I have to admit, I did something wrong with the pad, and so I lost the application. I can't even see it. So if somebody from the conference could reset this, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I wanted to see the results of the poll we had.
It was 43% absolutely yes, and 45 and 43% whenever possible.
Thank you, Marta. Okay, so following up on the questions there, one question I had for you is, do you think open source can play a role in helping with the shortage in skills we have in blockchain? I mean, as you said, blockchain is pretty young, and I actually have met people at the conference already saying, hey, I have all these projects coming up, but I don't have the resources. So, Makoto?
Yeah, I think, so that's another thing. So one aspect of open source and blockchain is trust. Maybe people can see the code and trust it. Another is that it's really more efficiency of spreading ideas. So if someone has an idea and they want to build something, rather than doing it all by themselves, they can actually maybe take an existing platform, maybe do some changes to it or add a new consensus algorithm, for instance, and try out new ideas. And open source allows you to kind of create this, I don't know, sandbox environment that you can try out new ideas much easier. And it's not, none of the platforms in Hyperledger are completely completed yet, but eventually we're going to make things, I think, across all the projects much more modular so that we can maybe cross-pollinate algorithms as much as possible. So things like consensus algorithms should be as pluggable as possible, but we'll see if we actually realize that vision. But there's actually very few number of people who have experience building blockchains and building these things. So having all the code out into the open, having the, more importantly, the governance in the open, people can not only see the design decisions that are made, but they can understand them. And that's the best way of educating new programmers to deal with this technology, because there's actually quite a lot of small details that are non-obvious. And once you get into building a project, especially from scratch, you can kind of understand that, oh, this design decision won't work because of this small detail that you understand. And so being able to share that information in a community with other people, putting a wiki, putting it in documentation is extremely important. And it's something that that we, of course, with Iroha can do better on. But it's something that that I think is really important for community building. And we try to do our best with doing things like study groups and helping people understand the code base.
All right, thank you. Jonathan, quickly.
I'll be quick. So I think in terms of building skills or finding skills, I think that open source actually makes it very easy for the developer to shine, so you can easily see who are the big contributors. There are many people that do stuff and contribute, and they consult and they advise and they have other companies or they build other projects. So being available is good. You're not trying to find people kind of with a flashlight, but on the other hand, it's a lot easier when you have a platform that you don't need to build all on your own. You just need to add your own layer. So if you're looking at skills, it used to be that you get like a lot of, I don't know, value internally if you hire like 50 or 100 people for the new blockchain project. Now you can do a lot of things with like 10 people, 5 people. It's very quick. It's because we build so much on the layer that you don't need to build. You just add your own solution. So you focus on the application. So I think open source helps in the sense that you know what you get in the framework, and then you need to look at the diff. And many people share a lot of samples and code and other open source usages that you can just get up to speed very quickly. So yeah.
So I would like to give credit to the audience and recognize the questions that have been popping up. And I think the first one, maybe to make it shorter, Jonathan, you could address the first one.
What is the first one?
But can a digital identity be kept on blockchain?
Okay,
I
so
think you're the best person
if
to
I speak too quickly, let me know, because I have a lot to say, but just, there are like two camps, right? There's one camp that says, it's good to have digital identity on blockchain because you want to know who are the participants. So we are an access control company. So we allow you to manage who can access, who can read, who can write. So we really help people to kind of get the blockchain certified in regulated environments. So that's one hand. On the other hand, you have other people that say, look, all this identity thing should be completely separate. I want privacy. I want unlinkability of transactions. I don't want people to profile me. I don't want them to track what I've done. So if you look at regulations, of course, you want the identity of the people, because people think like that, right? There's a KYC, AML. If you don't have authentication and authorization done right, what's the point in having an audit trail or reporting? If you don't know who are the participants, why do you care what they've done? But identity is a different topic because we say that if you want inclusion, you need to do it right. You need to do identity correctly. Otherwise, you will exclude so many people that don't have access to resources because they don't have an iPhone, for example, right? So that's kind of these are the two sides.
All right, thank you. No, I'm sorry, we have to go quick because we have to close. Sorry about that. I want to go to the next question. I already know, Makoto, this is a question for you. Do you own any kind of cryptocurrency and why? Quickly, you have 1 minute or two.
Okay, so cryptocurrencies are an interesting topic. So I first got into this space because of Bitcoin, just because it's very interesting that you could send money anywhere in the world, just like email. So yeah, I want to send money to Arno. I don't go down to the bank and type in some numbers and, oh, it's past 4 p.m., I can't send it. But yeah, just send just like an email. You type in the address, it just goes.
Convenience.
So, yeah, it's really just digital, and it's just made a lot of sense to me. And so I don't use cryptocurrency much. I used it to book my hotel here in Copenhagen, but it's more of just a hobby, I guess, than anything else. Our company deals with fiat currencies, so we work with people like central banks and banks to actually create real currencies, not cryptocurrencies.
All right, and then I'll take my prerogative of being the moderator here to actually answer the next question, which was one of the questions I haven't got to, which are the drawbacks of open source, because of course we have heard of supporters of open source, and so we're all very enthusiastic about it. There are drawbacks though. I mean, one of the main ones I would say is that it's a lot messier than, development in a closed environment, in the sense that in a company, typically you have some hierarchy and there is a management chain and you give orders and you give milestones, deadlines that the developers have to just comply to. In open source, it's much more democratic, and as we all know, democracy tends to be messy. It does come with all sorts of benefits that makes it worthwhile, but for instance, you can't just set a deadline and say, you guys have to deliver by that date. You have to work with the community has to agree, and it's a much flatter organization, right? So there is a level, there is the notion of maintainers that keep control. They are here to ensure that the system doesn't get broken, but it's much more democratic and a little bit more messy, I think, as a result. Yes, Jonathan Kent.
So a few things, right? So for example, again, I take Fabric as an example, and I'll take Azure as an example. So in Fabric, you have 27 companies. Sometimes they have conflicting interests. Sometimes they have different commercial needs. So if I'm in an open source environment, and People are telling me, I want to release it now and I don't want to have Android support because I don't have time for it. And somebody else wants it. So just think about this example. How do you reconcile? If it was a commercial agreement and we didn't have to go open source and there was no other contributor that comes in and pushes for a direction, then it's a lot easier to make the decision. Is it the right decision? I don't know. When it's in the open, yes, it's more messy, but it's more messy if you're talking about drawbacks. It's more messy, it takes more time. I argue that my job description is Jonathan cannot be nice because whatever I do, I have to piss off people, right? Because I make decisions. And even if you go for a vote, even if it's like 6 out of 10, there are 4 people that are not happy. So the problem with open source is you cannot always have like the direction and then do the one thing you wanted to do because there are so many opinions. If I look at Acera, the VP of R&D of Acera is Russian. He's a good friend of mine from Israel. And he's always telling me, look, all this democracy and all this open stuff, it's fine. But I'll tell you like what we say in Russian. You have a blanket and everybody is pushing, in his direction. There's a big hole in the middle. So he doesn't like this whole democracy. He comes in, gets requirements, and just gets stuff done. There's no democracy inside the company in a way. But we get stuff faster, but sometimes it's nice to get other people to tell us what they think about things, right? So there are 2 different models. I don't know. I don't know what's better. I like the open source way more, despite the extra, I call it investment. Yeah.
If you guys want to add anything, otherwise I'd like to move to the next question.
Well, I can just say a little bit about my philosophy. So I'm a huge, I like open source and collaboration in execution, finding solutions. But for design, I'm a huge fan of design dictatorship. So I think that there needs to be very clean and clear design, and that should guide the principles. And then, maybe there's lots of other ideas and use cases, but I think to really create a good design, you need to have, someone like the Steve Jobs type of character who sits up there and says, no, it has to be, this is the only natural way to create this. So anyways, that's my personal philosophy. So it's hard to realize that in open source, but if you can argue things rationally and logically, you can usually get that clean design, I think.
All right, so I have a different question that I wanted to actually bring up to the panel, which has to do with standards. And like I said, I'm an open technology person, and it includes standards. And I get a lot of requests from different standards organizations about launching some standards activity around blockchain. So the question is it too early to be thinking about standards for blockchain? So Marta, maybe you want to start.
Yes. So yes and no, I think. It is too early to produce documents, in my opinion, because documents tend to carve in stone what people are doing and stop actually development. And as I said, it's a new technology we don't really understand. We are still in the hype, on the top of the hype. There is a bit of discussion. We are developing POCs and then pushing for deployment. But wait, deployment? Why are we deploying things that we are not really understanding? So not that. I am a strong believer in developing reference code that other people can be using, and that's why open source is great, because we can work on the reference code that other people can take, use for their use cases. And that standard code is something that we should absolutely be working on and agreeing that this is a standard way to implement things, to frame, these are the standard frameworks to do. And coming up with standard definitions, because there is absolutely no understanding what is a standard definition of blockchain, what is a standard definition of distributed ledger, and that miscommunication causes a lot of problems. But documents, not yet, in my opinion.
All right. Anything else you guys want to add?
Yes. You want to go first?
Makoto.
Okay, I have something very quick to add. So I think for standards, it's as she said, it's way too early to create standards for the core blockchain levels. But at a higher protocol level, so like for payment protocols and things like that, it's a good time. And the reason is, once applications get built, so mobile apps, web apps, they get locked into a certain way of doing things, then it's really hard to change later. So my company's chief operating officer created a digital currency in Japan called EDI, well, digital money in Japan. It's used by about 110 million people, and so it's an NFC-based currency. And but there's many different NFC cards. So there's the same technology is used for Suica, for Pitapa, Pasmo, all these different things, and overseas like Oyster, Octopus card. But all these cards are using the same NFC technology, so maybe Felica technology developed by Sony, but they don't have interoperability because the data format, the data that's actually transmitted to the reader is different. And so just the reader looking at the data has a hard time knowing, which is this? Is this Pitapa? Is this whatever? And we have that now with QR codes. So if you scan a Bitcoin QR code, all it has is an address. It doesn't tell you it's Bitcoin. It doesn't tell you this is Ethereum. You have to know something about the format of the address, and even then you just guess most of the time. With ERC20 tokens now, you have no idea what token you're dealing with if all you have is just this address. And so that type of thing can be standardized now, and that's one of the things that actually we're trying to promote with open standards. So I think this year we're going to see a lot of, hopefully, movement in that direction.
All right, thank you. Jonathan?
So my take is that because you have so many different blockchain implementations, you have different stacks, but we have to be careful that what we came for the people are advocating for blockchain because we want to share information and securely. But what happens if we're going to have so many different implementations and they're not going to talk to each other? We're going to create actually more and more silos. So we have to talk to each other. And if you're looking at Bitcoin or Ethereum, or all the enterprise business level kind of blockchains, each of them is trying to solve different things, right? One is like, I'm allowing anyone to come in. I care about censorship resistance, for example. The banks are coming in, listen, I have sensitive customer information. I cannot just share it. There's some rules in Germany that you cannot move data around out of Germany to even AWS. So if you want to have like an enterprise solution that has different requirements, that's fine. You can address it in an enterprise blockchain, but we still have to talk to each other. So we have an access control layer that talks to different kind of blockchains, and I'm telling you, for us to do the adapter in a way that we don't have to play with the underlying code just to sit on top, it was really a nightmare. It took us like 2 years. But now we can talk to any blockchain in the same way. I think it's going to be natural for us to have a standard at some point. There are some working groups in the making because we are trying to see, okay, what is an account? What is a user? What is a participant? What is a validator? And most of the technologies are trying to solve the same thing with different modules. So I would advocate for more modular kind of blockchains. And yes, some working groups that we produce, it doesn't have to be documents, but let's agree on how we're trying to solve something. And then we see what is common and what is different. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. So we're about out of time. So I would like to put the poll question again on screen, see if the discussion has influenced people in any way. We already had a majority of people in favor saying that open source plays an important role, but...
while you're voting, because obviously we have a lot to say and you had more questions, there is an IBM stand and there is also Hyperledger booth at H30. And we are hanging around both of those booths, so please just come over and we can talk your ear out.
Absolutely. And we've been talking about blockchain and how young a technology it is, but it's also important to understand that at the same time, this is not just pie in the sky, it's real. We already have different applications in productions today. More and more vendors make announcements, they're consortium. It's important to realize it's a bit more difficult to adopt than some other technology where you can just do it on your own. Here, it actually takes a network, so it's really a consortium play type of thing. But there are more and more consortium looking into it and actually developing applications. And so, I don't want you to think that this is just something for the future. Obviously, it's still early, but it's always a good thing to be early adopters. So I see this doesn't really change. So
yeah.
Yes, people are.
So whatever we do, we couldn't discourage you from using the open source.
No, well, I think
guess that's a good
also
thing.
the question being stated, does open source play a role in your decisions? Well, the decisions couldn't change within 45 minutes.
But
Okay, but so
Do
we have
use
to
open
close
source,
on this.
it's
So,
good.
let's keep it at this. Thank you very much for joining me today on this panel. Thank you all for coming and entertaining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.